All right, everybody, buckle up, because today we're diving into some incredible military stories, stories you guys have been asking us about. We'll be covering a whole lot of ground, from a firsthand account of D-Day
Yeah.
to the challenges veterans face today.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right? The sheer range of experiences within the military, from those echoes of history all the way to present-day issues. It's a lot to unpack.
You got that right. So, to kick things off, let's rewind the clock back to June 6th, 1944, D-Day. We're going to talk about Lieutenant Colonel Gerhard Bolland, a paratrooper who landed in Normandy with the 82nd Airborne. His story, which we found in Army Times, is really something else.
What really struck me was how personally invested Bolland was in the whole thing. I mean, he was Norwegian American, so the Nazi occupation of Norway, that really hit home for him, don't you think? You can practically feel that fire in his words, that dedication.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of intense, the article mentioned that a paratrooper's gear back then, you ready for this, weighed about 85 pounds. Can you imagine jumping out of a plane with, like, a refrigerator strapped to your back?
It's mind-blowing, and as if that wasn't wild enough, get this. The Germans, they actually flooded Bolland's landing zone, the Murderate River. Talk about a nasty surprise. They knew the 82nd Airborne was coming, and they used the terrain to their advantage.
It's like something out of a nightmare. He almost drowned. He even said he heard a voice telling him to roll over. Turns out he was saved by his parachute. What a close call. It really drives home just how unpredictable and terrifying war can be.
Totally. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, wouldn't you say? That absolute determination to push through, even when facing those odds. It's incredible.
It really is. Makes you wonder how you'd react in those kinds of high-pressure moments. But speaking of intense situations, this time a little closer to home. Our next stories, from military.com and Army Times, well, they cover some pretty shocking events happening right now.
And this is where things get really complicated, even outside of combat zones. You know, the military, it's got its highs and lows, those incredible acts of courage. But unfortunately, there are times when you see betrayal, too.
Yeah, this next story is a tough one, not going to lie. Military.com uncovered a case of stolen valor, and it's pretty bad. We're talking about Army reservists, people who should know better, faking funeral honors.
Wait, to steal money?
Yeah.
Over $100,000. That's just, I can't even. It's awful. These guys are basically profiting off of the respect and the mourning for fallen soldiers and their families. Total betrayal of trust.
It's despicable. But on a brighter note, we do have the National Guard stepping up big time. Army Times has a whole piece about their response to Hurricane Helene down in the southeast. It's really something to see what they're capable of.
Oh, yeah. They're incredible. They're well-trained and so dedicated. This story shows just how crucial the Guard's dual role is. You know what I mean? One minute they're warriors, the next they're our neighbors, our friends, helping out in our communities. They're often the first ones there during a domestic crisis.
Right. It's amazing. They said almost 6,000 Guard members were deployed across several states, rescuing people from floods, cleaning up debris, getting aid to people who needed it. They were lifesavers, no question.
Absolutely. Whether it's a hurricane here or a deployment overseas, they meet every challenge with that same level of commitment. Makes you really appreciate the sacrifices they make every single day.
It really does. Speaking of serving your country, our final story from this batch takes us to, of all places, the world of politics. Military Times is reporting that 181 veterans are running for Congress in 2024. What do you think about that number?
That's an interesting one. It might sound like a lot, but it's actually been going down for decades.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, right? Like, what's going on with the relationship between military service and political leadership?
Really? I would have thought it was the opposite. Why do you think that's happening?
It's a tough one to answer. Probably a bunch of factors at play. The military itself is changing, becoming more diverse. Politics is more polarized than ever. Maybe even how the public sees military service is different now.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It really makes you consider how veterans keep serving their country in different ways even after they take off the uniform.
Exactly. And that actually leads us perfectly into our final deep dive today, which focuses on one of those ways. Adaptive sports. We'll be looking at this through the lens of a recent press release from VA News.
And it's a good news story, too. The VA just gave out almost $16 million in grants to support adaptive sports programs for veterans with disabilities.
I love it. These programs, they're about so much more than just physical rehabilitation. They create a real sense of community, purpose, and achievement. The release even features a Marine Corps veteran, Jatiah Taylor, who says adaptive sports completely turned her life around.
That's incredible. So tell me more about her experience. What kinds of struggles was she facing?
Well, after she left the service, Jataya had a hard time with her mental health, something a lot of veterans go through when they're trying to transition back to civilian life. But she discovered adaptive sports and found a new sense of purpose, like she belonged again. Pretty amazing stuff.
And get this, she didn't just participate. She ended up competing in wheelchair fencing at the 2024 Paralympics. Talk about making a comeback.
Right. It just proves how resilient she is. Every veteran has so much potential no matter what challenges they might be facing. They never cease to amaze me.
It's really inspiring. Her story shows how supporting veterans needs to go way beyond traditional medical care.
You got it. It's about creating opportunities for these men and women to really thrive in every aspect of their lives, to rediscover their passions, that drive they have, finding that feeling of belonging, of being part of something bigger than themselves. That's what makes these programs so powerful.
It makes you wonder what else is out there for veterans. Like, what could be their version of wheelchair fencing?
Such a good question. What are we doing as a society to make sure that veterans have everything they need, not just to get by, but to truly succeed?
Something to think about, for sure. Yeah, for sure. That's a question we should all be asking ourselves. And speaking of things we should be thinking about, I think this is a good place to start moving into our concluding thoughts for today. What are some of the big takeaways you'd like our listeners to walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember how diverse the military experience really is. I mean, think about it. We started with the beaches of Normandy, then we talked about Congress and even the Paralympics. It's pretty incredible.
There's been quite a ride, that's for sure.
Right. We've seen the incredible bravery of those soldiers who stormed the beaches on D-Day, but we also talked about the people who exploit the respect that comes with military service for their own personal gain. It's a shame that happens, but it's the reality.
And we definitely can't forget about how dedicated the National Guard is, especially during those natural disasters. And of course, hearing about veterans like Jataya Taylor and her journey, that was truly inspiring.
Exactly. I think it's a reminder that the military, just like any other part of life, it's got a little bit of everything, good and bad. And it's up to us to understand those complexities, to understand the challenges and the triumphs, the sacrifices and the victories.
It all comes back to recognizing that a person's service doesn't just end when they take off their uniform, right?
100%. And that's a powerful message, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really is. It makes you stop and think.
It does. And I hope it makes people want to do more than just think about these things.
Absolutely. Because it's one thing to acknowledge it, but that's just the first step.
Exactly. It's about asking ourselves, how can we help veterans transition back to civilian life? What can we do to make sure their sacrifices aren't forgotten? We should be asking these questions all the time.
You're absolutely right. These aren't just news stories, These are real people's lives.
Couldn't agree more. And just like LT Cole Bolland showed us with his D-Day story, people can do amazing things, even when things are really tough.
They really can. And, when we support organizations like the VA, when we push for better resources for veterans, even when we just take the time to listen to their stories, we're making a difference.
That's what it's all about. We all have a responsibility to honor the men and women who have served our country.
So as we wrap up this deep dive today, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
That's easy. Remember all the different aspects of military life we talked about today. Let it help you understand the challenges veterans face and inspire you to find your own way to support them.
I love it. And on that note, listeners, we'll leave you with this. What action will you take? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.